moment, she will become mired in them and will not be able to return to the real world. A drop of dew can be a part of the stream of consciousness, as important to the world as the plant on which it hangs. If you immerse yourself in the world of illusions, your consciousness will wander forever in their darkness, going into a non-existent space. It's hard to say why such life forms arose here, but the Sky Fox asked Agatha to just take her word for it. But didn't the Sky Fox herself say that Henry controls Agatha's soul, and she cannot disobey his orders? Henry has more important things to do. So first we need to find out the reason for the illusions, and then return to the issue of soul control. But their conversation was interrupted by two unknown people who had been tracking Agatha for a long time, and noticed that the target was approaching them. It turned out that they were subordinates of the Dark Clan, and they were tasked with finding an 18-year-old female student of the Cultivator Academy with a strong aura. Having obtained the sacred relic, one of them decided to try out a new method of creating monsters on Agatha and see the result. But then Agatha realized that she had seen these two before, because they had recently been on the news. It's strange why influential people needed an inconspicuous girl like Agatha. Perhaps they are simple performers. The guy's power level is higher than many magicians, and asked Agatha to temporarily return control of her body to her. Unexpectedly, Agatha refused for the first time. Although she had not been against letting the Sky Fox spend the whole day in a human body, Agatha wanted to solve the problem herself. Although Henry did not tolerate those who mocked the weak, but was not ready now for a duel with a strong opponent. Seeing the expression on Agatha's face, the attacking girl realized that she had a worthy opponent in front of her, and that only she could enter into battle with her. Now, Agatha seemed to feel the power of the Sky Fox and was ready to try out the new abilities herself. She stated that the guys mentioned a sacred relic that the guy she liked was looking for. But without listening to the end, the guy swung his sword and tried to attack Agatha before she could use her abilities. But before he could take a step, Agatha put out her hand and immediately ordered him to kneel. To his surprise, the boy realized that her magic was capable of forcing him to act against his will. Instead of kneeling, he lay down on the ground and his body obeyed Agatha's every word, as if she were his mistress. Without stopping there, Agatha commanded the magic to lift the boy up, because it was high time to teach him a lesson. Without understanding what was happening, he felt weightlessness and began to slowly rise into the air, which was what she had in mind. It was hard to understand how a young student could have such strong magic, but nothing could be done against her. Immediately after this, Agatha snapped her finger, and the guy rose into the air and fell face down on the stone platform. Agatha, in her new appearance, did not look like an inexperienced girl whose life could be controlled by idiots. Agatha liked this show so much that she wanted to repeat the trick and flip the guy over again. But his partner had serious strength and had no intention of watching her friend being bullied. The next moment, an invisible ribbon tied Agatha's hands, and this prevented her from activating the protective energy. Immediately after that, several magical ropes appeared, enveloping her body and turning it into a small cocoon. Yes, Agatha considered herself entitled to attack the strong, but the guy's partner warned that she was not the only strong magician here. And although this was the first time she had seen such a strong academy student, now it was all over, and Agatha should have understood what she was getting into. Agatha just smiled in response, because she liked the trick with the ropes, but now she wanted to see how they tied up the attacker herself. The words sounded very convincing, and she had no doubt that magic really began to change all around them. A few seconds later they switched places, and now the attacker herself was bound on all sides by her own magic. The two did not understand when the young lady had mastered such power, because no student her age had access to such abilities. Looking at them, the Sky Fox couldn't understand how these losers couldn't recognize a simple technique that she would have learned long ago. These two recently said that they know Agatha very well and can easily cope with her magical power. But now they are unlikely to say a word, because after Agatha's last blow, none of them will be able to get back on their feet. The Sky Fox realized that this was a strong blow, and that her ward had decided to do such an act for the first time, showing the full power of her magic. That same evening, the news reported that several girls had been attacked in the city at once, and the Criminal Bureau had already taken up the case. Henry didn't understand why Sophia suddenly decided to drag him out into the street at night, although the girl was simply worried about him and didn't want something to happen to him alone. Moreover, he had been behaving strangely in recent days, and was constantly talking on the phone with some girl unknown to her. But Henry knew that the demon invasion was near, and now was not the time to be distracted by the nonsense that Sophia was talking about. And she suddenly blushed with shame and said that she had recently become Henry's girlfriend, so she could invite the guy out. It was the first time Henry had heard such direct words from her, and for a moment he was even taken aback, not knowing what to answer her. But the situation with the monster attack was more serious than she thought. So the guy assured her that Sophia also knew that girl very well. It was difficult to explain to her how Agatha was able to rise from the dead and return to Earth in a new form. Suddenly, Sophia asked to take a closer look at her because the guy must have noticed some changes. Henry happily realized that she had reached level 9 and apologized for noticing it only now. Her friend's new abilities impressed Henry more than her fashionable clothes, and he knew that the Empress would also be delighted with such power. All this was only thanks to the exercises with magic that Henry recommended to her, and without his help the girl would hardly have reached such heights. Although, of course, she still had some work to do, and the guy understood that this was far from the limit of her capabilities. He believed that Sophia had a natural predisposition to the techniques shown in the last fight, and he saw this miracle with his own eyes. Realizing that the immortal spirit did not believe his words, Henry wanted to explain something that could escape even the gaze of the hovering soul. The sword that the Dark Clan was looking for was remade into a weapon against demons, so the relic looked different, but kept the same power inside. However, the spirit objected that it was not the sword that killed the demons, but the essence in the relic that destroyed the monsters, and these two things should not be confused. As usual, the spirit remained a bore, because the guy said exactly the same thing, only in different words. It seems that their argument would have lasted forever if Henry, after death, also became a spirit and was able to communicate with his mentor in the afterlife. At some point, their argument went too far, and the spirit asked the guy to cool down and not escalate the situation. And then he suddenly noticed that Sophia had gone the other way, and realized that he had been spending little time with his girlfriend in recent days. Of course, he would like to walk carefree with her by the sea, but now the main task was to stop the mutant invasion, and not waste time on pleasant things. Just recently, in visions, he saw memories of a past life, and thanks to them, he learned the history of the blade that the Emperor asked the best blacksmith to forge. Gradually, this secret was revealed to Henry, and he increasingly understood that the Hall of Souls was now only in his hands. However, the question remained as to where the purple blood sword was now, if it was not in that old house. And suddenly, looking at Sophia, a guess came to his mind. But it was hard to believe that it was true. Perhaps it was this girl who kept that very divine connection with the relic and knew much more than one could imagine. For a while, both froze in place, until a strange rustling sound was heard in the distance, as if someone was nearby. Sophia also heard this strange sound and turned around to find out whether she was imagining it, or whether there really was someone nearby. It turned out that they had been secretly followed all this time, and the stranger behind the tree realized that he had been noticed. But now, it seemed, there was no point in hiding, and the leader ordered his guys to also come out of hiding. All this time, they were closely watched by 2 mercenaries sent by the Dark Clan to get rid of the young people. Sophia remembered from the news that girls had disappeared in the evenings and realized that these 2 probably thought that she was here alone. Of course, it became clear that Sophia was with a young man, but it seemed that Henry was not a big problem for these mercenaries. However, they were very wrong, because the energy of these 2 young people could destroy not only mercenaries, but also any monster. The mercenary did not expect to see such a worthy enemy in the person of a young student, and doubted whether he would have enough strength to deal with the guy. But his friend, it seemed, was not going to waste time on nonsense and suggested simply attacking the students without delay. Sure, each of these guys was several times stronger than the average fighter, but Henry had already been through a lot, and wasn't going to give in to some idiots. And the very next second, Sophia saw a whirlwind of dust, and realized that her young man was even stronger than she imagined. Gradually the dust cleared and a dark silhouette appeared in the center, but it was unclear how this instant attack ended. Fortunately, Henry was already towering over his fallen opponent, although he understood that one attack was not enough for these mercenaries. But at that moment, turning around, he realized that he had left the girl alone and had lost sight of the second guy who would try to do his dirty work. To his surprise, after the mercenaries' attack, Sophia dodged the attack so sharply, as if she had foreseen the moment of the blow in advance. Even the mercenary didn't expect that this fragile girl would be so agile that she would recognize his next move in seconds. But she had no intention of stopping, and using the technique of numbness and encircling cloud, forced the guy to freeze in place. And indeed, the mercenary could not move a finger, realizing that they had agreed to carry out this task in vain. At the end, the girl just stuck out her tongue, because even Henry didn't know that she had recently acquired such an ability. Approaching the guy, Sophia asked what they should do with these 2 mercenaries now, and how to punish these guys. But Henry understood that he first needed to find out who ordered the attack, because the mercenaries were probably connected to the Dark Clan. Without wasting any time, he asked the guys directly why they were stealing girls at night, and what the real purpose of this series of attacks was. Looking at his opponent, the guy realized that the student was stronger than he thought, and he would have to do what he had been putting off until the last moment. For the sake of the common great cause, he was even ready to bite into an ampule of monster blood in order to increase his strength level to the limit. Yes, now Henry saw the same thing he saw in the estate with Richard, and understood that he would have to fight another monster for the second time in a week. He was not mistaken, and a moment later the mercenary lying on the ground turned into a bloodthirsty zombie. Although a minute ago he was a weak magician, now the dark essence was pouring energy into him, making him a dangerous opponent. It was strange that this mercenary would take such a step, but the spirit immediately noticed that he was 5 times stronger than Richard in that duel. In addition, he had an artifact with dark magic in his hands, and holding it, the monster made his first attack. Henry immediately ordered the immortal spirit to prepare for reunification and imbue his blade with all its power. And then, firmly gripping the hilt, he was ready, a second before the collision, to plunge this sword straight into the monster's chest. Luckily, that's what happened, because when the monster approached Henry, the guy plunged the blade of the sword into its chest with one movement. Incredibly, the guy managed to be faster than the monster, whose strength reached its limit with the help of dark energy. The collision occurred at the height of the building's roof, and now the mutant was flying down, realizing that these were the last seconds of his life. He fell with his whole body onto the stone square, the impact causing pieces of the pavement to fall, and the monster roared in pain across the entire square. Having landed on top of him, the guy realized that he knew only one person who was capable of giving such power, by giving him an ampule of mutant blood to drink. And then he asked the monster directly if Edward had really given him this ampule, forgetting to say that there was no turning back. Yes. This guy turned out to be not only strong, but also possessed secret information, and the former mercenary in the form of a monster was beside himself with rage, realizing that he had lost the fight. Judging by the silence, the guy was right, but now he wanted to know where the rest of the kidnapped girls were and what he was going to do with them. In response, he began to mumble incoherently, considering Henry a sinner who dared to stand between God and his great plan. And the very next second, black blood spurted out of his mouth, and it became clear that nothing more could be heard from this mutant. The cursed blood that gave the mercenary his power now turned against its owner. But they still had one more mercenary who was nearby and could be interrogated to find out hidden information. The guy warned that if the mercenary also drank the hidden blood of the monster, the same thing would happen to him as to his partner. It's hard to understand how Edward managed to get all these idiots to follow his lead, because everyone knew that demon blood does not give immortality. Drinking that blood was tantamount to suicide, and even if the fight ended in victory, he would still die that same evening. If Edward is forcing him to do all these dirty deeds, then now the guy has a chance to tell about it to the person who can help him. But he said with a smile that Henry would not succeed, and it became clear that the guy was under Edward's total influence and was unlikely to leave him alive. And then he told the girl to immediately move away from this guy, because he would most likely burst into pieces right now. Finally, he stated that one should not underestimate the determination of their leader, and even if Henry gained strength, the outcome of the main duel was not yet decided. Immediately after this, a bright glow appeared around the mercenary, as if the guy had burst into flames of hell before everyone's eyes. A few seconds later, only a charred body remained in his place, and it is difficult to imagine what this guy felt in his last moments. It's strange, because each of them knew what they were getting into, and only dark magic could motivate them not to fear death for the sake of the common cause. At that moment, the phone rang and, looking at the phone screen, Henry realized that Agatha had finally gotten in touch. It turned out that she had urgent news that Edward had long been associated with a dark clan, and, it seems, all these people are plotting something terrible. They kidnapped girls and turned them into zombies in order to find a relic that, according to legend, was kept in the soul of one of them. At that moment, bending over the corpse, Sophia noticed a ball of poison nearby, which he had not managed to bite into during his life. But Henry told her from afar not to approach that place, because it could be dangerous for the girl. Although in reality, it was already too late, because magic was breaking out of the small ball, and it became clear that contact could not be avoided. And the next second, like liquid, it splashed towards Sophia, and she, no matter how much she wanted to, could not dodge it. Like ink, this liquid got on her hand, and the girl realized in horror that contact with dark blood had already occurred. It was unclear how to help Sophia now, because all this time Henry had only been trying to protect his girl from this misfortune. But a vortex of dark energy was already swirling around the young student, and her skin began to change its healthy appearance, turning into zombie skin. The pupils in the girl's eyes instantly disappeared, and instead of Sophia's beautiful, kind eyes, There were only whites without pupils, like all monsters. But at that moment, Henry noticed something amazing appearing above Sophia's head, along with the dark energy, and the guy realized that his guess had been correct all along. After all, the goddess of light, with her sacred sword, interrupted the dark flow of energy from the girl's body, and even turned back time. She watched with sadness as Sophia's friends failed to prevent the disaster, and she herself had to come down to Earth to prevent the worst from happening. At one point it seemed that she had merged with Sophia into a single entity, and the energy of light had reached its limit, leaving no chance for the dark force. Then it became noticeable that the dark energy was gradually receding from the girl, and her skin was taking on its usual appearance. Yes, the curse was lifted instantly, but it was difficult to understand what had actually happened to her. Only the true power of the purple blood sword is capable of such a miracle, and fortunately it was Sophia that this goddess chose as her ward. Meanwhile, all members of Edward's clan gathered at the abandoned factory, because the guys and mercenaries had urgent news for their leader. Holding the broken talismans, the boy in horror told the boss that they were destroyed, and now he didn't know what to do. If the talismans were broken, their owners were already dead, which meant that Henry had managed to defeat the mercenaries after all. If there was even one person in the room who was capable of becoming a leader in the upcoming fight, the guy asked him to come forward and make this bold move. Any unnecessary panic would only get in the way now. But for the sake of saving humanity, he himself is ready to join the fight if necessary. However, he suddenly realized that the cursed blood of the mercenaries who fought Henry had touched the very sword he had been looking for all this time. He finally found a girl who carries the essence of the goddess, which means that he will soon have to fulfill his plan. Yes, this was great news for all the guys who were tirelessly searching for this girl, and now their efforts were finally crowned with success. However, it was impossible to act rashly, and Edward ordered that the information be hidden from prying eyes, especially from his father. They have one chance that may never come again, so they need to carefully plan and not let the Dark Clan get ahead of them. The next day at the academy, Michelle learned news that shocked even this young woman. She couldn't explain it, but right in front of her at the desk, she saw the student whose dead body she had just recently seen with her own eyes. And now Agatha sat at her desk with the rest of the students, as if nothing had happened and the attack of the dark entity had never happened. Moreover, it became clear that Sophia was no longer at odds with her, because before classes they talked as if they had been friends all their lives. And now even Michelle didn't know what to do about it, how to explain to herself what had happened and how she should feel about it. But Agatha herself seemed to be only interested in whether Henry, with whom she had long been secretly in love, was looking at her now. At that moment, breaking news started to appear on the big screen again, and this distracted the young people a little from various nonsense. In recent days, many young girls have gone missing in their city, and the news anchor asked everyone to be more vigilant and attentive to their safety. At this point, Jimmy whispered to Henry if he would be free after school and could spare him a few minutes. Besides, the guy forgot that he needed to complete tasks to level up faster, and Jimmy reminded him that their next mission was planned for today. However, Henry did not have time for this now, and asked his friends to put the matter aside for now and take care of more important things. And indeed, taking the piece of paper, the girl read that her boyfriend's level had grown so much that he could soon take first place in the academy's ranking. Jimmy was haunted by the thought that the crime bureau had announced a reward for anyone who could find the culprit behind the disappearance of all these unfortunate girls. To the surprise of his friends, it was Jimmy who was ready to take on this mission, although the guy never seemed like the type to solve complex mysteries. Suddenly the girl said that she could also participate, especially since she had long had a plan to catch the criminal. But Henry had already warned her that she should not interfere in this matter and put her life in serious danger. Now there was nothing more important than the life of this girl, especially since she had been contacted by a goddess whose relics the dark clans were hunting for. But these words sounded a little offensive, and turning away, Sophia declared that she would handle everything herself. If Henry didn't want to participate, she wasn't going to force him and only asked him not to interfere with her in this matter. He always felt that he had to protect Sophia, even though she always felt like a burden around him. However, she was never weak, and in response to Henry's help, she wanted to repay him in kind. As a result, after classes, all three went into the dark forest outside the academy and tried to do what the agents of the criminal bureau failed to do. Unfortunately, Henry had to agree, because he couldn't let Sophia wander around alone at night looking for a maniac. Chloe also asked to go with them, taking on the role of the victim and going out into the center of the forest to attract the criminal. She dressed as brightly and attractively as possible so that the maniac would choose her, and her friends would run out when he was one step away from Chloe. Jimmy thought the plan was brilliant, although Sophia thought it was too dangerous from the start, since Chloe was there alone. But Chloe was so attractive now that the pervert would definitely notice her from afar, and they would be able to catch him red-handed. And yet, Agatha thought the plan was terribly stupid, because only an idiot would fall for this trick and attack a girl in the middle of a dark forest. Unexpectedly for everyone, she declared that she intended to protect Henry, and his life was more important to her than Chloe's life. And the bait itself was there at that time, and hoped that its friends would not forget about it, carried away by the arguments. At some point, Henry asked her to calm down and not make noise, because that way they could scare away the maniac, who was probably somewhere nearby. Jimmy also asked the girl to be quiet, otherwise her loud screams would ruin their whole plan. At some point, turning around, Chloe noticed a dark silhouette in the distance and realized that it would soon be her friend's turn. Of course, she was ready for the meeting from the very beginning. But when she saw the maniac ahead, she screamed loudly in fear. And he, looking straight at her from the shadows of the forest, was glad to meet this girl, and that he could now play with her to his heart's content. But even from afar, Henry realized that this man was unlikely to be their main target, and having caught him, they would not reach Edward's clan. Indeed, instead of grabbing her and turning her into a zombie, the man suddenly opened his coat, exposing himself to the student. It seemed that what Chloe saw was more terrifying than the Walking Dead, and she realized that she would not sleep all night, if she survived at all. The other two girls saw it too, and even though they were in ambush, they couldn't help but scream, and Sophia squeezed her eyes shut as tight as she could. Chloe immediately ran to the side, but after a few steps, as luck would have it, a stone appeared under her foot. She tripped and fell down, and the maniac continued to pursue her, slowly putting on his cloak. It was at that moment that Henry appeared there, and managed to pick up the girl in his arms. The man immediately got dressed, wrapped himself in a cloak, and ran into the depths of the forest, realizing that he was about to be caught. Jimmy didn't want to let this scoundrel get away so easily, and ordered his friends to run after him immediately. As long as Henry was here, there was no way that bastard could escape, and using his acceleration, he rushed straight towards him. At the same time, Julia and her subordinates patrolled the city at night, hoping that the killer would reveal himself. And suddenly they saw a dot approaching in the distance, and it became clear that it was Henry, for some reason holding a fellow student in his arms. The guy didn't have time to explain this scene. He just wanted to catch and personally interrogate the scoundrel. Running past Julia, he shouted that he would explain everything later, and asked her not to jump to conclusions. But it seems the girl had already made her decision, and with one deft kick to the guy's head, she neutralized the criminal. It turned out that she mistook Henry for a maniac who kidnaps girls, considering Chloe to be his next victim. Imagine her surprise when Chloe quickly explained everything, meaning that the punch to Henry's face was completely in vain. It turned out that Agatha, unexpectedly for everyone, had already caught that maniac from the forest and was now ready to bring him to justice. But first, she simply let him go from a great height, and the guy fell to the ground with his whole body. She only hoped that Henry would now pay attention to her, because she was trying so hard to catch up with the criminal. Julia couldn't find the words to apologize to the guy because she was really ashamed of this blow. But Henry didn't seem to be offended, and said that it wasn't worth taking it to heart, but rather just forgetting about it. The moment Agatha realized that the maniac had been under some kind of magical spell all this time, she quickly went down to him. Then, activating the magic, she commanded the spell to dissipate so that the criminal could be interrogated in peace. The man's face was covered in cold sweat, and now in the cell he would hardly be able to have fun with the students as he was used to doing. He immediately saw in front of him the guy nicknamed the King of Newbies and Julia, whom the whole city knew. But it is unlikely that the girl herself was in the mood for long conversations, and stated that he would definitely not escape punishment. He told how he was returning home the previous evening and lost consciousness after a sudden attack. And a second later they realized that it was a trap and the guys from Edward's clan were most likely already in the forest. They were not mistaken. Several people from the clan surrounded Sophia and Jimmy from all sides, who remained in the same place. Jimmy loudly warned them that Sophia was the newbie king's girlfriend, and they would be in trouble if they laid a finger on her. However, now there were 3 fighters, and the guy had no doubt that they would cope with her. Sophia couldn't understand why she became Edward's target, and finally tried to find out from them. But there was little time left, and the gang leader immediately activated magic to finish what he had started. Sophia tried her best to remain alert and not panic, knowing that she had to play her part. After all, if she allows them to kidnap her, she will end up in the lair of this clan, and will be able to find out the answers to all the questions. But even without the magic of destruction, one of the guys realized that the girl already possessed the first level of soul purification. However, this was not just a cleansing of the soul, but a strange technique of magic, usually inaccessible to ordinary people. Even Jimmy, who knew full well about his classmate's strength, saw her display her full power for the first time. In the center of the forest where they were, a vortex of energy suddenly appeared, emitted by Sophia, and it became clear that the girl had almost reached the peak of her capabilities. Even from afar, everyone saw the beginning of the fight and realized that they had not quite made it there in time. But Henry knew that this was not the usual aura he usually felt around his girlfriend. Jimmy even hid away from his friend and only asked her from afar not to do anything stupid and not to engage in a duel. But at that moment, Julia appeared in front of him and began to question Jimmy about what he saw. Suddenly, the guy said that Sophia had entered into a fight with 3 experienced fighters, and, having quickly defeated them, went after them to find out where their lair was. The girl couldn't believe that Jimmy just let her go and didn't follow her. However, Agatha now had the opportunity to track her down by the soul trail that remains for a short time after a person. This tracking technique surprised even Julia, and she realized that she had been prepared in advance. Using magic, Agatha calmed her down, because she could find the student at any moment and her friends only had to follow her. Without wasting any time, the 3 of them took off into the air, leaving Jimmy standing in place, unable to move quickly. Once above the trees, Julia saw 3 guys in the distance, and next to them another energy ball emanating from Sophia. And indeed, she boldly chased after these guys, each of whom had already managed to learn her true strength. Julia understood that the girl was exposing herself to great danger and was not going to let things slide. But Henry immediately warned that if they intervened right now, they would scare off the clan members and never get to the truth. Now he trusted Sophia completely and knew that she would not die carrying out this mission even alone. After all, Henry himself had recently told her that no one around her could be trusted, which meant that there could be an informant among them. Agatha knew deep down that the guy was right, even though it was hard for her to think how hard it was for this fragile girl right now. However, Julia was not interested in empty chatter, and she was still only concerned about Sophia's life, which was in danger. But the guy warned again that the girl no longer needed their protection, and with her strength, she could protect anyone. Here, Agatha remembered how she had studied the energy traces of the criminals, and realized that she had not been able to find the auras of the members of the Dark Gang. But it was known that the demon could directly control Edward and most likely forced him to carry out his dark orders, making him a puppet. But if things don't go according to plan, Edward will probably claim that he was under the influence of magic, and thus be able to divert suspicion from himself. Suddenly, Henry responded by saying that they could use this to their advantage, and that there was no need to fear the clan whose leader he had already defeated. Soon they found themselves on the spot and saw the territory of the former factory, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. In addition to the heads of the dark clans, Edward himself should have been here, and Henry understood that he wanted to meet him more than anything. Having warned his girlfriends that this would be the most difficult mission of their lives, the guy was ready to be the first to rush inside and take the blow himself. Today, a tough battle awaited them. The strongest representatives of the dark clans, capable of feeding directly from the demon, had gathered in the building. As the 3 guys were getting here, one of the mercenaries noticed the tail, but he knew that Henry wouldn't get out of here once he was here. Luckily, they managed to fulfill the master's order, and the guy shouted loudly that Sophia was right here, in the abandoned factory. He was not mistaken. The girl really did come here herself, although none of them knew why she did it. But now it didn't matter, because their main goal was in a place surrounded on all sides by dark magic. Not knowing her plan, Edward immediately came out of the shadows and thanked the guys for bringing their common victory closer. And then he ordered the girl to be brought here, promising that each of the guys would take an honorable place in the history of mankind. And then Sophia saw before her a terrible picture that she would never be able to forget. After all, right in front of her were all the kidnapped girls, turned into zombies, and they were all in the same room. In addition, the leader of the trio stated that Sophia would be the next one to face the fate of becoming a walking dead. And at that moment she saw her childhood friend, but she could barely speak, and her whole body had long since rotted. However, tears were flowing from the girl's eyes, because she still understood what kind of monster these scoundrels had turned her into. She ordered her friend to run away from here immediately, because these people are real madmen and will spare no one. Immediately after this, the girl screamed in an inhuman voice, and Sophia realized that she would never talk to her best friend again. Unable to comprehend this cruelty, Sophia covered her face with her hand, realizing that this was exactly the kind of puppet these people wanted to turn her into. Edward approached her and joyfully told her about the great mission and asked the girl not to despair and not to worry. Her body will be sacrificed to a sacred relic that will help save humanity from enraged monsters. But hearing these words, Sophia was once again convinced that the guy himself was a monster, which he had been trying to fight all his life. She had to stop these madmen at all costs before they kidnapped all the girls in the city. But it was unlikely that she herself would have been able to stop such a strong fighter as Edward, and the guy only laughed at her arrogance. Suddenly he heard a loud bang nearby, and looking to the side, realized that someone had used destructive magic. Yes, the door was knocked down with exactly the same force that Henry had used in the last brutal duel. The alchemist really was standing in front of him, and it was unlikely that he would have forgiven him for the disappearance of Sophia, and left him alive. Edward knew that Henry's intervention could ruin all his efforts to save humanity and prevent the demons from carrying out their plans. But Agatha had long since realized who this vain guy really was. Knowing that he only wanted to get his hands on all the glory, the guys immediately stated that they didn't know about the surveillance. Otherwise, they would have dealt with these students on the way to the secret base. Nearby, Julia saw so many zombies in one place for the first time and realized that they had once been ordinary students. She could not forgive the scoundrel for what he had done to the unfortunate girls, and now she would not back down from Edward for anything in the world. But Henry knew the strength of his childhood friend because he had been studying magic since he was a child and was too serious an opponent. It was just a matter between these two guys, so Henry wanted to deal with it personally without involving his friends. Julia had to give in to this guy for the first time, because she understood that Henry was right, and the duel could be too dangerous. Fortunately, Sophia was alive, and she achieved what she was in such a hurry to get here for. But it was unlikely that Agatha could be dissuaded from participating in the battle, because with the help of illusions and the ghost seal, she was ready to make her contribution. By surrounding the plant's territory with a magical dome, she made it clear that no one would get out of here without her will. It seemed that for the first time in a long time, Edward had serious enemies, and he understood that everything was heading this way from the very beginning. But he was not ready to accept that they would ruin his plan and interrupt the path he had been on since childhood. He then crushed the glasses in his hand, and it became clear that the guy had no vision problems and was only wearing them for cover. Yes, this guy had to go through a lot, because once he had a happy family, but then his mother suddenly died before his eyes. Edward's rage grew with each passing second, but what's worse is that his fighting power grew with it, reaching its highest point. Seeing this, Julia loudly asked Henry to be careful, because if he entered into a fight with this guy, he risked running into dark magic. Edward was already at the 9th level of soul purification, and if he used all his strength, no one would be able to cope with him. The immortal spirit offered the boy to combine their energies, but this time, Henry wanted to finish this matter himself. Much had changed since his first mentor had appeared from the Hall of Heroic Souls, and now the boy was ready to use his skills in battle. And Edward insisted that all this was not started for the sake of revenge, but to become the savior of the world and stop the coming invasion. Only with the help of the sacred sword could he kill his father, who had long been known for his connections with the Dark Clan and his connivance with demons. It was strange to hear about saving people when Edward himself was conducting monstrous experiments, turning girls into mutants. But he claimed that he did it for the good of humanity, and a few victims were a worthy price to pay for it. Henry could no longer bear to hear how easily this bastard spoke of killing the people he himself supposedly wanted to protect. Humanity does not need heroes who are willing to sacrifice their lives and become the same monsters as their enemies. Only the dark forces needed such a beast savior, and most likely, this guy was their messenger. The battle was inevitable, and although Edward understood the strength of his opponent, he was ready to use all his mana. And then they clashed, and an explosion sounded over the territory of the plant, spilling out a huge amount of magical energy. Fortunately, the girls' abilities also came in handy, because it was they who had to prevent the agents of the Dark Clan from entering the duel. Sophia had never seen such a shockwave in her life, and was surprised at how much energy was hidden in her boyfriend. These two were real monsters, and Julia finally came to terms with the fact that even she couldn't radiate that much energy. Edward also managed to feel the full power of his opponent and his sacred relic, which he always had with him. Both guys were close to breaking through to the next stage, but tomorrow will tell which of them will eventually achieve it. It was a pity that Henry forbade the girls to interfere in the duel, and did not even allow the immortal spirit to help. However, right now they also had an important task, because a huge crowd of agents was already approaching them. Sophia could take on a few people to give her boyfriend the opportunity to continue the one-on-one duel with Edward. Before they could get any closer, she immediately activated her destructive power, and beams of bright light shot towards the agents. None of them could have imagined that the young student was capable of attacking with such powerful energy. and it was clear that Henry had managed to teach her a lot. But what he saw the next second made him freeze for a moment, because he had never experienced such horror before. The entire group of agents that Julia was fighting was taken down by one energy wave, and that was enough to immobilize all the guys. Looking down on them, the girl realized that none of these weaklings could compare to the fighting power she had achieved. All that was left was to unite the guys' forces into one, and their leader ordered to use protective spells. But there was no point in even thinking about that. Julia was not going to let them carry out their plan and increase their power. She threw another stream of destructive energy at them, which should have made the boys stop. But it was too late, because the guys were already dreaming of quickly dealing with the girls and having some good fun with them. It was difficult to fight against a crowd of agents, each of whom had a high level of strength and elixirs from Edward. It seems that they can't do without Agatha's help again. And the girl said with a smile that she has an excellent plan. After all, the energy that the Heavenly Fox had given her allowed her to carry out that cold attack that clearly none of the agents had expected. Indeed, behind them, the agent suddenly saw several mercenaries with eyes glowing bright green. Fortunately, she managed to take control of many agents, and now, under hypnosis, they were ready to fight their former colleagues. They acted as if they had gone crazy in a second and attacked their own, forgetting that they were supposed to fight side by side as a team. However, having figured out her plan, the chief agent shouted to Agatha that they also knew a couple of interesting tricks. And then, rushing straight at her, the guys were ready to destroy the devil who used forbidden magic against them. But instead of Agatha, they saw two girls in front of them, ready to respond with even greater force, capable of destroying any of them. And so it happened. A second later, each guy felt a deadly wave of energy tearing their bodies apart. These guys were finished, and no agent would be able to resist them again. Sophia was a little worried about her boyfriend, but Julia knew that Henry would most likely be okay. Right now, he was in the same place where his duel with Edward had started, and was ready to show everything he had learned recently. He used the elements one after another and controlled his magic so skillfully, as if he had mastered all the techniques at once all his life. Seeing Edward in front of him, Henry realized that he had not expected such pressure, and now was the best moment for the next attack. However, all this time, Edward was waiting for the right moment to counterattack and not allow his opponent's magic to unleash its full force. From the outside, it might have seemed like he was scared, but in reality, he was just luring Henry's abilities towards himself. Julia immediately noticed that this guy was acting too calmly and shouted loudly at Henry to be careful. But most likely, he no longer heard her, and putting forward his sacred blade, he was sure that their duel would soon end. But immediately after that, the energies of two elements rushed towards him, and without reaching Edward, he had to first repel two attacks. And then, looking down, he realized that his opponent had disappeared, although a second ago he had been standing right on the floor in front of him. Of course, Henry could use the ability of the Sky Fox and quickly find Edward, but now there was simply no time for that. After all, the energy continued to attack him from all sides, and at some point he realized that all this had been planned in advance. All that remained was to turn to the relic with which he had once been able to strike Richard and win that unequal battle. However, at the moment when he was already preparing his blow, he suddenly saw Edward to his left, and it became clear that now the onslaught would be even stronger. With a loud cry, the boy declared that it was time to get even for everything that Henry had done to him, and that now he would hardly be able to dodge his blow. And although Sophia knew how fast Henry could be, she understood that the fight was taking place on the terrace